On this Saturday night, uncovering the truth in another province. An investigation begins at the site of a former Nova Scotia residential school.
We spoke the truth, and now the truth is coming forth.
The painstaking task ahead. A Saskatchewan residential school survivor walks to Ottawa. Plus, a heat wave in Toronto kicks off a hot, dry summer for Canada. Could an increase in wildfires be a concern when it comes to COVID-19? And a mysterious brain illness in the Maritimes.
The discovery of a potentially new and unknown syndrome is scary.
The race to find a cause.
Global National with Robin Gill. Reporting tonight, Maura Nasser.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us. The search for the truth is underway at the site of another former residential school. After hearing of the discovery of 215 unmarked graves in Kamloops, BC, a Nova Scotia First Nation enlisted the help of an archaeologist who is volunteering his time to find any lost children who died at the Shubenacadie Indian Residential School. Jesse Thomas has more on the scale, scope, and significance of this search.
A search using ground-penetrating radar began Saturday morning at the site of the former Shubenacadie Residential School in Nova Scotia. Anthropologist Jonathan Fowler is working with a team to investigate the site.
This work needs to happen now, and it needs to be done thoroughly, and it needs to be done rapidly without sacrificing quality.
It operated from 1929 until 1967 and was the only Indigenous residential school in the Maritimes. Instances of abuse have been widely shared by former residential school survivors like Alan Knockwood.
The education was through punishment, and they tried to turn me into a white guy, a Caucasian. They succeeded in knocking the language out of me.
Demolished in 1986, it's still a place of trauma for the Mi'kmaq. The community is hurting and mourning following the apparent discovery of 215 children buried at the former residential school site in Kamloops, BC. Knockwood, who says his aunt attended the Shubenacadie facility, told him there were burials here.
I remember coming up here with her and walking the grounds and having her point out, they're buried here, they're buried over there. They're buried over here.
Given the discovery in Kamloops, the Mi'kmaq community wanted to act fast and search for any new evidence of burials.
And I called Jonathan and Roger just to get their thoughts on potentially of looking at this site. And they automatically said yes, fairly quick. And I said, we run on no budget. And they said they were willing to do it for free.
Knockwood says it's important to exhaust all search options to know the full truth.
But I'm glad that they're finally getting the word out there and finally listening. And, the truth hurts.
The federal government says there is funding available to support this work, but Shubenacadie First Nation isn't waiting for Ottawa to act.
My thing is that I hate when stuff gets stuck in the red tape and, gets put off for forever, right? So we just took it, something we wanted to get going for all of the Maritimes communities, and just wanted it started right away. And
this ground search will take weeks to complete. Organizers say it'll be more exhaustive using better technology than a previous effort. Jesse Thomas, Global News, Shubenacadie, Nova Scotia.
Pressure is mounting on the Catholic Church to take responsibility for its role in the residential school system. Today, Pope Francis met with both Vatican-based Canadian cardinals. Further details on the meeting have not been released, but it comes just hours after Prime Minister Justin Trudeau called on the Church to do more. Canada's first Indigenous Justice Minister, Jody Wilson-Raybould, says Trudeau also needs to take more action. West Block host Mercedes Stevenson joins us to talk about her interview with Trudeau's former cabinet minister. Mercedes.
Farah, the discovery of the remains of 215 children buried on the site of what was once Canada's largest residential school has left former Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould angry and frustrated. She is criticizing the lack of progress the Liberal government has made on the reconciliation file. She places the blame squarely at the feet of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau for the lack of concrete action to transform the policies and practices that would recognize the basic rights of Indigenous people, she says.
The Prime Minister made a commitment to make that transformative change, and that's done through laws, changing laws, policies, and the operational practices of government. He hasn't done that. This is hard work, it's complex work, but he committed to doing it, and it has to start at the very top.
Wilson-Raybould says the reason for this lack of action is simple. It doesn't drive enough votes come election time.
We need to have the political will to tackle these issues, even if they don't necessarily translate into a significant number of votes for a party. And we're in election season, and I know that the political parties are looking for votes, but this is a human rights issue. This is a moral issue.
Wilson-Raybould acknowledged the federal government has implemented some measures on a complex file, but when it comes to the transformative policies that were promised, Wilson-Raybould says little has actually been accomplished and is calling for the government to step up to the plate. Farah?
Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa. Thank you, Mercedes. And Mercedes will have more on this topic tomorrow on the West Block, right here on Global. A Saskatchewan woman is taking action to honor the victims and survivors of Canada's residential school system. Patricia Ballantyne set off today on a walk that will take her through 3 provinces and cover more than 2,300 kilometers. She's walking to Ottawa from the former site of the Prince Albert Indian Student Residential School in Saskatchewan. Ballantyne is a residential school survivor, and she hopes her journey will inspire others to speak out.
For years and years, I had blocked it out and didn't think about it. Like, oh, it was nothing. And then when it really hits you hard, and you just don't realize how traumatic it was until you think about it.
Once in Ottawa, Ballantyne hopes to talk to Indigenous Services Minister Mark Miller about reforming the First Nations Child Family Services system. An historic deal is set to change how much tax wealthy multinational companies pay in the countries where they operate. G7 nations, including Canada, reached a deal Saturday to set a global minimum corporate tax rate. As David Akin reports, the G7 believe it could add billions to their treasury.
Rich nations like Canada have struggled for years to raise more revenue from large multinationals such as Google, Amazon, and Facebook, which often book profits from sales in countries around the world in jurisdictions where they pay little or no tax.
If we see the reality in the world, there are a lot of corporates that find ways not to be taxed at all.
Now, in an effort being branded as a tax fairness initiative, G7 finance ministers, including Canada's Chrystia Freeland, have reached a deal that would see multinationals face a corporate tax rate of at least 15% in jurisdictions where they make their sales.
We're going to level the playing field and inject that principle of fairness into our global tax system. That's the prize.
In Canada, the combined federal-provincial corporate tax rate right now is about 26%.
This will affect other jurisdictions that have a much lower or non-existent rate, and could potentially help Canada play off its other strategic benefits.
Freeland said the initiative is good for Canada.
Multinational companies need to pay their fair share of taxes. Jurisdiction shopping allows them to avoid doing that.
But the federal Conservatives oppose this global tax deal.
Although we strongly support taking steps to combat tax evasion and tax avoidance internationally, we know that happens. But that policy should be set in Canada because there are, I believe, serious ramifications, not only for our sovereignty, but our ability to promote our own economic interests here at home in Canada.
But the G7 finance ministers believe a corporate minimum tax could raise tens of billions of dollars for governments who have gone deep into deficit to prop up their economies during the pandemic. Saturday's agreement lays the groundwork for more intense talks on the issue next week when G7 leaders, including Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, gather in England for their first in-person meetings since the health crisis began. David Akin, Global News, Ottawa.
A heat warning has been issued for parts of Toronto, where the temperature is forecast to soar above 30 degrees for the next several days. Luckily, lifeguards are back on duty at the beaches, which were officially reopened for swimming today. Because Environment Canada says highs between 31 and 34 degrees are expected for the next few days, emergency cooling centers are also open, providing air conditioning, resting spaces also for the public. Nighttime temperatures are expected to drop to only 20 degrees. And with temperatures like that and a hot, dry summer on the way for much of Canada, it's no wonder the threat of wildfires is growing. But there is also concern. The flames could cause more than just damage, dust, and smoke, but spread dangerous pathogens in the air. As Jamie Mauracher explains, that's sparking even more concern about the spread of COVID-19.
As wildfires burn in Manitoba, smoke fills the air for hundreds of kilometers, a danger to local residents' health, but for reasons you may not realize.
There is the potential for people to be breathing in things that might cause infections.
Pathogens that could make you sick. By launching a drone into a wildfire, Lita Kobziar, a professor of wildland fire science at the University of Idaho, found as soil, plants, and animal matter burns, it exposes thousands of bacteria and fungi. Surviving the heat, she explains, these organisms get picked up and sent into the air.
Essentially, smoke acting as a biological conveyor belt that is spreading biodiversity around the world.
We can see that they're there. Whether or not they are able to infect somebody is a different question.
But for Dr. Don Sin, it's not a question.
There's no doubt about that.
The Vancouver-based respirologist sounded the alarm last year, concerned about the spread of COVID-19 amid wildfire season. And while it hasn't been proven the virus could travel in smoke, Sin says the theory makes sense.
There have been some smaller studies showing that they are well carried by particle matters and air pollution particles.
He's hoping to see it studied further. A heavy lift, according to the BC Centre for Disease Control.
There's no way we'd be able to say they got it from the smoke unless we could, do whole genome sequencing on the virus in the smoke and whole genome sequencing on that individual and anybody else around them.
The focus for Kobziar and her team is to confirm whether the hundreds of pathogens they found are in fact harmful to humans. The hope? To be prepared in the face of any new illness hitching a ride. Jamie Mauracher, Global News, Toronto.
When Canada started hearing about the novel coronavirus, a different disease was stoking fears in New Brunswick. In early 2020, doctors identified an unusual combination of neurological symptoms in a cluster of patients. For every 8 people who catch the disease, 1 has died. As Ross Lord explains, the province is racing to find out what's making people so sick.
A year after New Brunswick doctors started grouping cases together, they're still stumped about a brain illness that's killed 6 people and afflicted a suspected 48 others.
The discovery of a potentially new and unknown syndrome is scary.
The mystery disease is devastating. 2 years ago, Roger Ellis was feeling fine. 3 weeks later, his life was short-circuited. He got sick with a worsening illness that soon left him struggling to move and to communicate. Doctors still don't know exactly what has stricken Ellis.
They've tested for dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, PSP, CJD. I mean, I could go on. They even did antibody testing, historical antibody testing. And I've confirmed with Dr. Mauracher this week that he has nothing else that they can find. He has no other disease that already has a name.
Compounding families' anxiety is the New Brunswick health system's reluctance to reveal anything about the disease until a government memo to doctors was leaked to the media. The province has appointed a new committee of doctors to review cases and find a cause. They're also circulating a lengthy questionnaire for families to find common contributing factors to a disease that has been reported only in New Brunswick.
One of the problems is basically all these diseases, they do start pretty much the same way. A little bit of cognitive disorder, some strange muscle movements.
He says only over time can they confirm if it's a new disease or a variation of an existing one. At age 63, Roger Ellis is actually feeling better than he was, but no one knows for how long. His family welcomes the new efforts to find answers, but wonders if those answers will come in time for him. Ross Lord, Global News.
A look back at the global pandemic that began 40 years ago, how COVID-19 is affecting the fight against HIV/AIDS. It has been 40 years since the first cases of the disease that would become known as AIDS were reported in the United States. The outbreak grew into a pandemic that has since claimed more than 34 million lives. While treatments have come a long way, there is still no vaccine. And now some researchers in the U.S. say COVID-19 has derailed the fight against HIV/AIDS, siphoning away healthcare workers and other critical resources. Jennifer Johnson reports.
In San Francisco's Golden Gate Park, a national AIDS memorial tribute. 40 years after the U.S. Centers for Disease Control reported the first cases of a mysterious illness attacking healthy gay men. AIDS was a terrifying diagnosis. Doctors had no effective treatment, no matter how rich or famous you were.
So I was going to go back to my home in California and lock myself in my house and wait to die, because that's what we thought of HIV. It was a death sentence.
But Olympic gold medal diver Greg Louganis' doctor, his cousin, told him to keep training and compete in the 1988 Games.
I think it ultimately saved my life.
The stigma of being HIV positive was crushing to members of the gay community. The disease looked different to the world after basketball star Magic Johnson revealed his diagnosis in 1991. Researchers struggled for 15 years to find effective, life-prolonging treatments.
I think people tend to forget the sorrow, the difficulty, the suffering that came before that. We have made a remarkable progress.
Dr. Perry Halkitis has been living with HIV for more than 35 years. The virus has taken his former partner and a close friend just a few days ago.
I thought that part of my life was over. I thought the death of my friends was over, and it's not.
But there is new hope. Moderna, which raced to create a COVID-19 vaccine, soon plans to start clinical trials on a potential HIV vaccine. Currently, antiretroviral therapy helps patients live longer, healthy lives. But 1.5 million people are still being diagnosed with HIV each year, and hundreds of thousands die.
This is a disease that continues to exist, and one for which there is no vaccine, and one for which there is no cure.
Many believe the U.S. could see its first increase in AIDS infections in years after so much medical attention and research was focused on COVID-19. Why advocates continue to push governments and the medical community to find a cure 4 decades after the virus was first discovered. Jennifer Johnson, Global News, Washington.
Still ahead, the unique tool in Canada shining new light on the damage COVID long haulers face.
You're watching Global National.
We're starting to learn more about the long-term impact COVID-19 can have on vital organs. But there are now troubling signs about its effects on our vascular system. On this week's edition of The New Reality, Canadian science is shining a light on the damage an infection can leave behind. Here's Donna Friesen with a preview. Donna.
Farah, as people recuperate from COVID-19, researchers are looking into what lies ahead for some of them who have lingering symptoms. They're known as the long haulers, and one of the many things they're trying to figure out is what the virus does to blood vessels. This week on The New Reality, I talked to one scientist at the University of Saskatchewan. He and his team are using the Canadian light source. It's a light brighter than the sun to look incredibly deeply into blood vessels.
What we do see in the severe COVID cases is the lining on the inside of the blood vessels that becomes infected causes inflammation and swelling around the blood vessels. And what that causes is for the blood vessels to contract and clamp down. So there's just less area for that blood to flow through in the blood vessels. If you just reduce blood flow to the heart, you can have life-threatening arrhythmias, so disruptions in the contraction of the heart. You can also have reduced kidney function if there's reduced blood flow to the kidneys. Certainly the brain, lots of people report brain fog and other cognitive impairments. And these are all part and parcel of other vascular disorders that have already been well studied for decades. And we're now pulling a lot of these pieces together and seeing that they do fit into this puzzle with COVID infection.
The tool he is using to do this is amazing. It's the only one of its kind in Canada. It's called a synchrotron, and it generates a beam of light millions of times brighter than the sun. And that allows researchers to look right down to the molecular level at all kinds of material, including tissue from blood vessels. The point of this is to understand what the long-term risk factors might be for people who got COVID and survived. But there may be things going on inside the blood vessels that could affect major organs and could lead to higher risks of things like stroke and dementia, even erectile dysfunction. It's fascinating research. It's happening right now here in Canada. Farah?
All right, looking forward to the story. Thank you, Donna Friesen. And you can watch the full story on the new reality tonight at 7 p.m. right here on Global. What do you get a legendary pilot for their birthday? Next, the fly past fit for a major milestone. On the eve of D-Day, a Canadian fighter pilot named Stocky Edwards turned 23 years old while serving overseas. The boy from Saskatchewan had barely seen a plane before signing up for the military. He went on to become an aviation legend. So it's no surprise a fly pass was in store as his BC hometown celebrates its new centenarian. The 100th birthday bash also featured a drive-past parade with over 200 cars. Local dignitaries, military members, and RCMP officers joined the public celebration. Beforehand, Edwards sat down to reflect on his life in the skies.
I would still like to be a fighter pilot. Somebody said like riding a bicycle. I did 373 combat missions. And the day the war was over, or this thing was over, it was a feeling of, what do I do now? I've been getting up every morning early, combat, in the air. So that's all I wanted to do was go out and do a job for somebody.
In lieu of gifts, people were asked to donate to his Wetland and Wildlife Conservation Fund or the Stocky Edwards Legacy Trust, a fund for young Canadians pursuing careers in aviation. His birthday wish has raised over $125,000 so far. And on behalf of all of us, happy birthday, Stocky. And that's Global National for this Saturday night. I'm Farah Nasser. Thank you for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Marsh Lake and Yukon Territory. Thank you for watching. I'll be back here tomorrow. Have a great night.